it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen.
The Instrument by Ivan Radev.
Well, only 31 to go. I don't know how I got myself into this mess. All I remember is me and my buddy Josh talking over a scotch on a Friday night about how he'd rented a rundown utility building around the city centre. He told me he wants to make it a nice, cosy pub, much like the one we frequent. Next thing I know, I get a call the following morning where he tells me I could earn the easiest $150 of my life. It's not going to take you long, mate. Tuning a piano is easier than it sounds. His sweet lies came just 2 days after my rent's due date, so, well, I agreed. I was a music major in college. I'd seen how they do the job before, and watching a couple of YouTube videos gave me confidence that it really wouldn't be too hard. It didn't take me long to realize how freaking wrong I was. To start, I arrived at the pub-to-be, only to be greeted by a literal inch of dust. It was covering everything, besides a small path in the middle of the room, through which they dragged the piano and the bar equipment. I'm by no means a germaphobe. If I was, I'd be dead. But I still had to clean around my workplace, otherwise I risked lung cancer by the time I'd finished. That task in itself took about an hour. And secondly, the piano, if you could even call it that, was an old wreck. Its soft pedal fell victim long ago. There were 5 strings that had rusted beyond salvation and a myriad of other broken parts that had me walk the half-mile distance to the nearest music shop 2 times already. What bothered me was that I wasn't even expected to do a good job. It would still sound pretty bad by the time I was done with it. Josh was always aware of that inevitability. After all, it would only ever be used to play sappy drunk men songs in the middle of the night. Making matters worse, the sun had been blazing ever since early morning, making me fry in my own sauce inside the 1-story glorified shed. Its old, black metal roof served much like an improvised camp stove, making the heat inside almost unbearable. It all seemed really depressing at that point, my chances of freeing myself from working on Sunday dwindling together with my patience. Oh, I really needed help. I called Josh, demanding compensation, but all he offered was buying me a beer, and 2 hours later, I was still waiting for it. I'd say I was properly pissed at that point. I decided to go out, take some fresh air, vent a bit of my frustration, and accept the fact I'd be working throughout the whole weekend. Nothing could be done about that, really. I managed to fix the first 57 keys, and although it has 88 in total, I started from the bass. That meant I still had most of the triple string keys to do. Basically, there were 93 potentially broken strings ahead of me, which would entail another music shop trip, and a lot of alcohol. I was done. As I was wallowing in self-pity, something rather peculiar happened. The heavy summer air started ringing with this weird melody. It sounded like a broken string instrument, or perhaps a music box, playing a simple yet intriguing tune. It would go for 2 bars and then stop, only to clank a tone infrequently. It was as if something was missing, but it would always come back to start that short part which really grabbed my attention. This is some sort of minor chord with... What is this interval? I wondered, confused since, although nothing was really out of the ordinary, I couldn't really understand how it could sound so beautiful. It must be microtones. I just don't know what else it could be. Flashbacks to my student life started going through my mind. We studied microtones, sounds that lie between 2 piano keys, and I knew some composers had used them. I remembered a professor mentioning how Debussy was inspired by them after hearing a foreign musician play. Nevertheless, these sounds were always so very unpopular, to the point I couldn't recall a single piece with them. The tune kept on going in the background. I was transfixed. It was something otherworldly, even with how much of it was missing. I just couldn't fathom who would create such a piece. Drawn in by the sound, I started walking to the back of Josh's shack. When I turned the corner, I was met with a sight even more confusing than the mic. There stood a young girl with long black hair, wearing a perfectly white summer dress spanning just below her knees. Her skin was pale, almost unnaturally so for the middle of August. The wind was playing with the light fabric and her hair so gently, I felt dazed. I couldn't make out much more detail from the distance I was at, but I saw she was cranking an odd contraption placed atop a rustic wooden table. The inexplicably haunting melody coming from underneath her hands drew me forwards. Next thing I remember, I was standing right in front of her, looking into her deep brown eyes. She had little makeup, besides the red lipstick she was wearing. It stood out on her white face, much like blood on snow. She was undeniably beautiful, her mesmerizing smile forcing my heart to skip a beat. I felt like a teenager who'd just fallen in love, sweaty and confused, ready to run for cover. "Would you like to join me?" she asked, looking me straight in the eyes. I should have asked myself questions, like, how was she there? What was she doing in the back of the pub? Why did she decide to play that weird thing? Who brought the table? Isn't this all too good to be true? Nevertheless, I was spellbound. I think I just nodded in agreement, not realizing what I was getting myself into. "Take a look at this." She pointed her thin hand at the large, improvised music box in front of us. At the core of it was a copper hammer attached to a big cranking wheel she was operating by hand. It was moving along an iron rail, which had rusted to the point it got uneven, making the music have this sad timbre. As the plank moved, it would hit these small copper nuts and silver coins attached to a long copper cable. Looking at it, I realized how it managed to produce tones that a piano wouldn't, but I found it confusing. How could something so old and broken still make such grasping sounds? It should have been a screeching mess, interrupted by dysrhythmic clangor every time the hammer bumped into the rotten iron. I was perplexed. No logical explanation came to my mind as to how the instrument was working. I stared at it, hypnotized, time slipping away from me with every loop passing by. The summer sun is not a reliable time teller, the minutes and hours flying by as it refuses to leave the sky and settle under the horizon. "Oh, evening time is upon us." She stopped playing. "Would you care to join us for dinner?" I was so focused on the musical contraption, I somehow forgot she was there. I lifted my gaze to meet hers, and I saw her umber eyes, but I wasn't in the backyard anymore. We were at the back seat of a luxurious-looking SUV, coming into which I had no recollections of. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but there was something about her, something that reassured me that it was going to be fine. Perhaps that's the way a succubus abducts her victims to hell, but at that moment I felt as if I could trust her with my life. Her eyes showed no malice. Her expression was strangely positive, almost childlike. She was talking to me, and I noticed the way she spoke was strange, but what else about her wasn't? She explained to me we were going to her house, and I'd meet her family. She told me she had 2 brothers who meant the world to her, and a stout, conservative father who was very kind at heart despite his appearance. I was getting myself into a huge mess. In normal circumstances, I'd be thinking how to jump off the car before I get killed, wherever they were taking me, but again, she seemed so benevolent. Her words painted a picture of a happy, loving home where I'd be accepted with open arms. It sounds insane, but her gentle demeanor made everything make sense to me. Even when I was visiting my ex-girlfriend's parents, after some good 7 years of dating, even then I felt uncomfortable. There was always this feeling that in the silence of the in-laws-to-be lies unfathomable disapproval and blame. I didn't get that feeling with the girl in front of me, though. I was neither afraid of her brothers, nor of the monarch of a father she was illustrating so vividly. "He can stop a car with his bare hands," she exclaimed, with sparkling eyes and pride in her father. She sounded a lot younger than she looked, almost as if there was a child's soul in that beautiful woman's body. "He sounds very reliable," I concurred, never for once getting a vision of the old man's fist pummeling my ribs into salt. Instead, I felt protected, as illogical as that is. The very man who was most likely to be my executioner felt like a friend, someone who would give his life for mine. It's scary to think how convincing that feeling was. "I humbly welcome you to the Maya Mansion." She pointed her hand towards a big metal gateway, which was slowly opening as to commemorate our arrival. Like a kid, I smiled as I watched the steel door swing open before us, ushering us into the forest. I was looking at the bewitching lady for so long I never noticed we were going out of town. Back then, I felt no unease, let alone dread. But reflecting on it, what was I thinking? I neither knew where I was nor how I'd gotten there. I was at the total mercy of a strange girl I'd just met, and her driver. Her driver? I didn't notice him before. Must have taken us at least an hour to get to such deep wilderness, but I never bothered to look at him. The thought made me flinch, blood rushing to my head. Suddenly, the feeling of comfort and safety vanished, my hands twitching as a single streak of ice-cold sweat went down my arm. There was something off about this guy. The girl kept talking to me, but I could no longer pay attention to her. My eyes were nailed to the rear-view mirror, which offered a corner view of the driver. He seemed tall, dressed in a black suit, silvery white eyes practically glued to the road. My heartbeat was racing, waiting for something to happen. His gaze was really unusual. Not only did he not blink once whilst driving, but his eyes were just so dead. He wasn't looking at me through the mirror, but I felt this discomforting sensation, like I was being watched by him, well, by something. My subconsciousness was preparing me for a fight, pumping pain-numbing adrenaline through my veins. I couldn't find any reasonable explanation why the driver upset me so much, considering he had so far done nothing out of the ordinary, unlike the girl. Perhaps it was his pale, pastel-textured skin that attracted my attention the most, but that alone shouldn't be a reason to feel such primal fear towards him. "Hey, you can give Albert your jacket if you like." The girl was smiling at me as we were going through a big wooden door, almost twice my height. Once again, time just slipped through under me. I frantically looked around to see where the driver was, my eyes hunting through the shadowy garden behind us, seeking to find evidence, a silhouette, that the snow-skinned man was a safe distance away. I investigated every corner, every wallowing branch, but I could see neither the car nor its driver. "Sir, if you would." A gloved hand was the first thing I saw as I turned my head around. My breath froze, and my teeth started clattering. It was him. Somehow, he was behind me, extending his right hand towards me in what would otherwise be an elegant gesture, offering to take my summer jacket to a hanger. I looked at him, dazed and petrified. I couldn't move. I couldn't say a word. He was not making eye contact, and it didn't help that he had slightly bent down his head, akin to a bow. "Well, you don't have to, if you wish not to. Come on, dinner time is upon us." The girl pulled my left hand, turning her head around to beam a wide smile at me. Her intervention shook some of the fear off me, but now I was weary. There was just no logical reason to believe she was innately good, while I guess the butler was seeping evil out of his every pore. I followed the girl while tracking her escort out of the corner of my eye. The house had a huge entryway, with two enormous, symmetrical stairwells extending on either side. The design was rustic and featured a lot of paintings, some of which I even recognized. I don't quite believe it myself, but I can swear I saw a Monet there. I would write it off as a very good imitation or a print, but the impeccably polished wooden interior was complemented by a huge and extremely detailed Arabic carpet, covering most of the floor in the room. Those tend to cost well over $10,000, and I guess they're hard to replicate for cheap. I couldn't think about art too much, though, as to my disdain, the butler continued walking with us, just a few steps behind us. My host must have felt my unease, as she gestured him to stop following by holding up her right hand, palm open, towards him. He bowed and turned around towards the opposite door of the one we were heading to. "Hey, my siblings and my father are all nice guys, you know. Try not to worry too much about stuff." The lady in the white dress whispered to me as she pushed the door open, only to reveal an even bigger room, which had a massive, perhaps 10-meter-long table in the middle. The table itself was a piece of art, with many intricate carvings decorating the sides and legs, while bright golden metal lined the edges and covered most of the top part. The thought that the table was made with real gold crossed my mind, but my attention was taken by the hundreds of candles shining from the 3 large chandeliers hanging above us. Oh, how do you even light something like this? Not only were the candles numerous, but some of them were almost as high as the ceiling, which itself was twice the height of the one at home. "I see you're liking the atmosphere." There was a man in front of me who had a weird smile. He seemed cunning, and I could feel some disapproval from him, but in no way did he remind me of the butler. Blue-eyed, he had a milky brown pullover and well-ironed grey trousers. His rowdy blonde hair was the only imperfection I'd noticed ever since I met the girl. Well, that and the instrument, of course. "Hey, Joseph, you're scaring our guest. Behave yourself." Another man approached, this one taller and with dark hair. He was big, approaching the 2-meter mark, and, like the girl, he had very saturated brown eyes. He was wearing a vest with a square pattern, red and green shirt underneath. His legs were long and unusually muscular, so were his arms and torso. Nonetheless, he seemed just as benevolent as the girl. Maybe I was resolving myself to death, since I wouldn't even be a sport if he was to fight me. "Joseph, Klaus, you're both scaring my guest. What's wrong with you?" The girl planted one foot on the ground, her skinny white hands now resting on her waist. To my surprise, both men started looking embarrassed, took a step back and apologized. Somehow, she was not only part of this incredibly strange family, but she also seemed able to order around what I deduced were her siblings with ease. "It's rare Eliza brings a guest in. I do hope you enjoy yourself tonight, and please excuse any peculiarities you might have seen or felt today." Another man approached, who was somehow even bigger than the Klaus fellow. He had white hair and a well-mended beard, barely losing its original brown color to silver. He was wearing a suit, which is a weird attire for the usual home dinner, but nothing about my situation was quite normal anyway. Also, when he apologized for what I'd gone through that day, he sounded genuine. Back then I didn't notice, but I guess the others were too excited to think too much about what it felt for me, a newcomer, to catch a glimpse of their world. The silver cutlery, the golden table, the candle-lit mansion in a forest that's not even on the map. Those were all beautiful things to experience, looking back on it. And Eliza, she was the most beautiful girl I'd ever laid eyes upon. She was blushing at her father's remark, and I felt myself becoming lightheaded to the point of giddiness. I was afraid to keep looking at her, surrounded by the 3 men, but for some reason I felt I wasn't in control of myself anymore. If this strange attraction was to be the cause of my death, I was fine with it. Living to become old only to slowly rot away to cancer or diabetes was not for me. At least, that's what I thought back then. "So," she stuttered, "this is my father Nicholas and my two brothers, Klaus on the right and Joseph on the left." "Nice to meet you," I uttered awkwardly, as I was still regaining my mental composure. "Come on, let's eat," the blonde one, Joseph, ushered. "I can kill for a meal right about now." His use of words took me aback, and not in a particularly good way. I wasn't the only one, though, as I noticed everyone else frowning at him. That gave me some sense of security, a rather fake one, but still I could sit down at the obscenely large table without fearing I'll be on it later on. The whole ordeal had made me hungry, and I thought I might as well try some of that good life before kicking the bucket. "So, my friend here, Tim, he's very sensitive when it comes to music." How did she know my name? I had absolutely no memory of sharing it with her. Then again, I couldn't recall half the day. Least I could assume is that I'd introduced myself at some point. "You can hear it." Her expression changed, as if she was saying something of immense importance. I could feel the others holding their breaths for a moment. They seemed excited. I didn't know why, but there seemed to be a great meaning in me being able to hear the big, broken music box from before. "There are only 2 nights left." "No way." "Joseph, mind your manners." Nicholas smacked his bare-claw arm onto the table, making it reverberate throughout the room. "We are civilized people. Circumstance does not dictate how we conduct ourselves. There is a time to dine, and there is a time to talk." The rest of the room became deathly silent in the blink of an eye. I could read the disappointment written on everyone else's faces, but I could not challenge this man. Not only was he naturally scary, with his bulky build and deep, commanding gaze, but I also knew nothing about what they were going on about. "Tim, I wish to offer you dinner, but you must excuse one detail." Nicholas exhaled audibly, as if there was some sort of a load on his shoulders. "I must ask Albert to come and serve it to us. Would that be acceptable to you?" As soon as I heard the name Albert, my teeth snapped shut, pressing and grinding against each other. I needed all my willpower just to slowly open my lips. I inhaled, the air seemingly so cold I could feel it cut through the meat of my throat. I was shaking like a leaf. I didn't know why, but it was almost as if I was suffering from hypothermia. I didn't have the strength to speak out, but I finally managed to force my neck to nod in agreement. Soon enough, the dreaded man came in from another, smaller door and started bringing in dishes with food I struggled to recognize. I think there was octopus, caviar, a lot of seafood mixed in with some exotic-looking vegetables and fruit. Albert was bringing plate after plate, and soon everyone on the table was served except me. "Hey, Tim, what would you like to eat?" Eliza turned to me as she was sitting on the closest chair to mine. "You can partake in what we're having, or you can order anything else you wish." With all that had happened, I really would enjoy some fish and chips with a nice cold beer, but I felt that would be extremely inappropriate, and I reckoned I wouldn't get another chance to try whatever they were having again in my life. This food looks delicious," I uttered, looking at the girl next to me, the icy grip of fear around my heart gently melting. As soon as I said those words, the butler went back to the other room and then almost immediately returned bearing multiple plates. I steeled myself for when he came next to me, gripping my meticulously carved chair with my shaking fingers. "Hey, you garbage, proceed on all fours as you serve Master Tim," Joseph shouted out of the blue, gesturing with his hand towards me. His eyes were red with anger for some reason I couldn't quite fathom. At first I didn't even understand what was going on, but then the butler actually knelt down and started crawling towards me, plates positioned on his back. He went around the table and as he finally reached me, I feared the worst. Maybe that would be the moment he jumped me with a knife he was hiding under his waiter's clothing. Or maybe he finally revealed he was a demon, with crimson snake eyes and large vampiric teeth. If anything, Joseph's humiliating order would be enough to push a good man who had a bad day over the brink, let alone this creep. Not Albert, though. He silently and very carefully placed the dishes in front of me, in perfect order, while his knees were still planted on the floor. Then, after he was done, he crawled back to the other room where I wouldn't see him any more that night. At least, as far as I can remember, which unfortunately doesn't say much. The mood quickly shifted afterwards, as Eliza clapped her hands in delight and ushered me to eat. The food was tasty in ways I can't even describe. I've honestly never eaten anything quite like what I had that very first night in Maya Mansion. I experienced a masterful blend of textures, tastes, and aromas, all packed up in dishes that not only overjoyed the receptors in my mouth, but also looked very much like art. The great food and the mellow wine, Eliza's smile next to me, and the gentle, warm embrace of the grand fireplace across me, it all made me so strangely happy and tired. The words of my host started melting, fusing together in a soothing cacophony of sound. My vision became blurry, and soon my eyes started closing. Maybe it was because of the strange magic around these people, or maybe I just had a long, blistering hot day of work, which culminated in the weirdest and most exhilarating night of my life. I'm one of those people who kind of catch themselves when drinking, always going home before I make a fool of myself. As much as I wanted to stay, I knew I shouldn't. Hey, can I... Suddenly I found myself in my sleeping clothes, next to the sink in my house, holding up the toothbrush loaded with paste. I looked up and met my stare in the mirror. The chills came back instantly, my pumping heart pulsating hard throughout my body. My ears were deafened by the sound of my own blood banging around in them. Once again, how did I get to this point? I really lack any memory of what happened during what was, I supposed, a multi-hour trip back from the forest estate to where I lived. Then, something happened. I saw a pitch-black, crooked silhouette flash behind me, reflected in my mirror. It was that man, the butler. I turned, holding my fist up, fight or flight instinct fully triggered. My hand was shaking so badly, I thought defeat and thus death was imminent. I shouted for him to go away, to leave me alone. I swore and then I cried out for help. My vision was blurry. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear as my arteries were jammed with rushing blood. I collapsed, helpless on the ground, releasing my fist in surrender. There's no way I could win against that guy, was there? I must have wallowed and trembled on the floor for many minutes, before eventually picking myself up and scrambling for my bedroom, where, hopefully, I'd find my phone. My first thought was to call emergency, but what the hell would I tell them? Would anyone really believe me if I said a demon was in my house? Telling the operator, the vampire that I kind of met on this trippy dinner party with some strange, beautiful girl and her family, is coming after me, would at best be a good laugh. At worst, it would be a ticket for the Looney Express straight into the local mental facility. Then I thought I could seek help from a friend. I looked through my contact list, which, in all honesty, was dwindling following the not-so-recent breakup with my ex. I made one of the most common mistakes in life, orbiting around a person and her entourage of friends. When our time was over, not only did I find myself alone in an empty house, but also I had nobody to call. Except Josh, I guess. But he's a prick. Fuck. I'd rather get killed by the monster than bother calling him. He didn't even bring me the relief beer he'd promised. No way he comes to slay a demon in the middle of the night. Reflecting back on my own existence and my friends made me kind of sad, but I reminded myself that life itself is pretty random. Reason regained control of the steering wheel, and I came to the conclusion that even if everything that evening was weird beyond explanation, it still didn't mean the butler invaded my bathroom. Besides, with all that weird power those people had, they could off me any time they wished. I was alive, and that was reason enough to feel relatively safe. I tucked myself under the blanket and prepared myself for what was supposed to be the most restless night in my life. Surprisingly, I slept. I slept like a freshly slaughtered lamb on a warm, summer, star-lit evening. As I woke up the following morning, I entertained the thought that everything was just a one-time thing, the sort of prank rich people do to some poor fellows like me. Maybe I got drugged somehow. I don't know when they did it. I didn't feel a thing, but who knows? I guess some ninja poison dart could work. It all sounded stupid in my head, but stupid was better than downright impossible. I proceeded to make my morning coffee when I heard something that made my exhausted soul bleed bitter, frigid tears. I was more sad than scared when the sound of the doorbell echoed throughout my home. I really hoped yesterday would be some rude but still rather whimsical gag the Mayer family had played on me. As I approached the door, I could hear impatient footsteps on the other side. Someone really wanted to see me, which, in my situation, couldn't be good. Best case scenario, it was the landlord who never quite grasped the fact that when I leased this property for 5 years, I was expecting my ex to cover some of the bills associated with it. Still, he wasn't the kind to come knocking on the door on a Sunday. He respects weekends and was only a few days late. He knew kicking me out would incur him more losses than just letting a delay every other month slide. For the first time in my life, I wanted to see his ugly mug as I bent down to look through the spy hole. Unfortunately, the person I saw on the other side wasn't him. It was Joseph. I caught a faint glint in his eyes as he seemed to have noticed me. I tried retreating from the door as quietly as I could, careful to not make any sound whatsoever. I tiptoed backwards, hoping to escape through one of the windows facing the crappy backyard that came with the property. "Hey, I know you're there." My exhaustion and sadness quickly gave way to fright when I heard those words. Even if this was all a game to them, even if I feared the butler for no reason at all, this visit meant they were, for whatever reason, obsessed with me. I wanted nothing to do with their twisted games. I stumbled as I tried to turn around and run for it. My body made a loud thud as I bounced off the floor and sprinted towards the other side of the house. "Hey, please don't run. Look, this isn't what you think it is." He was a fool if he thought I'd believe him at that point. Besides, even I didn't know what I thought this whole thing was. I was so confused and utterly scared that I wouldn't be able to stop my neglected muscles from heading the way they were heading, even if I actually wanted to. My house wasn't big by any means. One door was all that stood between me and the children's room-to-be, which faced the coveted yard. I slammed myself through it without ever slowing down, knocking the door off both its hinges. As this new obstacle fell on my path, it tripped me over. I could see the ground getting closer as I flew towards it. I put my hands in front of my face, bracing for impact. I clenched my teeth, ready to immediately pull myself up and jump through the window. Instead of pain, however, what I felt was much worse. Two long, white hands caught me softly, entangling themselves around me. With what seemed like no effort at all, the butler had my body suspended mid-flight. His hands were extended far away from his body. He was holding on to me, but somehow he didn't seem to feel my weight at all. His posture was such that it seemed as if he was either nailed to the floor or he weighed a literal ton. I screamed in panic as I felt like a swine about to meet the axe. I struggled, kicking around and landing a few elbow hits on his face and neck, but he didn't even flinch. It was like fighting a cold rock. After a few seconds of struggle, he started to slowly put me down so I could stand on my own 2 feet again. His skin was just as cold as his white, uncaring eyes. I could feel the creeping Arctic chill penetrate my clothes and nail itself deep in me. I trembled so hard it felt my tissue would shatter, blasting thousands of bloody ice shards all around. Being touched by that thing, I knew at that moment, I knew it wasn't human. Master Tim, you must excuse me, but running away just can't do. For all my life, I thought I'd meet my end in a witty, book-worthy way. I thought I'd be one of those guys who'd crack a bad joke on their deathbed and then just kind of die, so everybody's confused as to what to feel. In reality, though, I was frozen stiff. I wanted to run, but I just couldn't. In part, I knew that even if I tried, I wouldn't be able to outrun that thing. It was just unnaturally strong. At that moment, though, I didn't really think much. I felt, commanded to do as he said. It had this weird presence. I just couldn't disobey his instructions. His empty eyes impaled my mind and fixed it to his will. I was able to reason, think and feel, but at the same time I knew what he said to be true. There was no aggression in him. If anything, his posture looked as if he was showing reverence towards me. It's just that something within him was so strong and powerful that it gripped my conscience with its sharp, algid claws and crushed my will into submission. If you would, please follow me to the car. My eyes traced the man as he slowly walked past me towards the entrance, where I'd seen Joseph before. He showed no hatred, malice, or hostility. Nothing to suggest he was going to hurt me if I dashed to the backyard window, but I knew I must comply. He had me on an invisible leash, shackled to his voice. Maybe that's how true fear works, but I felt almost as if I was looking up to him. Puppeteered, my feet lifted, and I walked. In rhythm with the butler, I made step after step after step. The muted thuds of our feet pressing on the cheap, creaking wooden floor aligned in agonizing unison. Perfectly spaced apart, our footsteps were akin to a metronome. Tirelessly counting the beats of suffocating fear, my heart pushed through my veins. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, tap. I inhaled violently, almost as if I was awoken from a very deep, catatonic slumber. My senses sharpened, forcing time itself to warp for a heartbeat. The being in front of me, he was tapping that song. He was walking, stumbling in a way that was clearly similar to the rhythm of the song I'd heard the music box play. My ears started ringing. I could hear the tones as if I was there, behind Josh's pub, listening to that unworldly tune. I could feel the metallic taste of the nuts and bolts that made up the old, hand-cranked instrument. I could hear, feel, even taste the music. I was strung onto that device, moved by the strange power of the man before me, hitting every beat with utmost precision. For a brief moment, it felt like I descended to a plane where sound was more than a mechanical wave reverberating through the air. I could touch the music. I could talk to it. And not only that strange piece with the microtones, I could feel everything. Hey, you there. Hey, Tim. Don't tell me you fucking broke. I got literally shaken out of the trance I found myself in. In front of me, I saw Joseph, worried, shaking me to the point of pain. He was breathing heavily, his pupils dilated by the adrenaline. He was shouting, asking me if I was okay. Wonder quickly gave way to confusion, as I was too overwhelmed to understand what in hell was going on with me. It was only after Joseph bore his thumb so hard into my shoulder joints and I screamed in pain that I finally came to my senses. Hey, sorry, man. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought I'd done something to you. He was panting, stuttering, trembling like a feverish dog. What had caused this was not anger or hatred, and it looked too damn good to be some sort of sick act to mess with me. He was genuinely worried about me. That thought gave me shivers, as I realized that there was something really important at stake here. That and his choice of pronouns. He called the butler it. I watched Joseph sweat before me. He was afraid, terrified. I remembered him mentioning something the previous night about there being little time left. I couldn't think of many things a man in his position would fear so much as to be on the edge of breaking. I was damn certain he wasn't overdue on his rent payment. Hey, Joseph. I struggled to find my words. It's okay. I think I'm fine, in a way. So, it didn't hurt you? Joseph clenched my arms by the elbows, still shaking and mumbling, but at least regaining his color back from the white canvas he was before. No, I don't think so, I replied, trying to rewind in my mind the string of events that unfolded earlier. My memory's been fuzzy since yesterday, but weirdly enough, I only remember it being strangely respectful towards me. Yeah, that's how it is. Almost makes you feel like it's your friend when... He paused, visibly gulping at the thought of what he was going to say next. When what? I inquired, out of both curiosity and concern for my safety. What is he? Well, it's a pretty long story, and I don't think we should be wasting time here. I promise you'll get a good explanation when we go back home. Hey, I snapped, without any particular consideration for my health and well-being. Tell me what the fuck is going on already. At that point, I wasn't scared of Joseph. He was obviously playing some part in all of this, but his meek eyes and trembling lips were most likely not an act. He also sounded like he needed me for some reason, so chances were high he wouldn't harm me. The real problem, it was standing just a few paces away from us, next to the luxury SUV I'd found myself in yesterday. The butler looked straight into me, almost as if he was judging me. His face expression was blank as always, but I could feel a smile gently creeping in. It was as if something was awakening inside of him. Maybe it was the exact same thing that Joseph was so terrified of. Speaking of the blonde man directly in front of me, he was mumbling something quietly to himself. It sounded German. That just added an additional layer of confusion, where there was already plenty. Well, he let out a sob. It's not for me. Would you come to the mansion for Liz? If you don't, then, well, she will die tomorrow. Die? I exclaimed. I felt genuinely worried, even though this was all so illogical. Something about the girl from yesterday, something made her so endearing in my mind. She was special. She was a part of that weird world with the songs. I don't know why, but I knew she'd seen that place the butler showed me. I was sure she'd danced there, in the million lights and sounds. With a brilliant white dress, she gently floated atop the waves of rhythm until she could ascend. I'm coming, I stated. My feelings, my thoughts changed by the thought of losing Eliza. Like a computer, everything in me reset, and all the fear, all the confusion, everything that shackled me up until a moment ago was alleviated. The place with the songs. It called for me. I was summoned to participate in something that was out of this world. I rushed past Joseph and quickly sat at the back of the car, door mindfully opened by the white-skinned butler. The young Maya sibling got even more confused as to what had just happened, me changing my mind so quickly and suddenly becoming unnaturally decisive about a trip to their estate. My mind now clear, I could see, feel what had chained him in fear. I knew he was about to die tomorrow night. Little did he know it would be by my hands. Time was of the essence. We had to go. The song, it needed me. In a way beyond the limits of human understanding and science, the thing that was their butler had showed me what part I was to play in this family's fate. I ushered the young man to come in the car, and he complied. As we were driven towards the mansion, I requested nobody talks and the radio be muted. Work needed to be done. The tune from the music box, it slithered around through the depths of my brain, sparking a wave of colours and music with every beat, with every vicious contraction of my heart. I started humming. Soon enough, the butler was tapping with one finger on the steering wheel, a metronome made of flesh and malice. My excitement grew. Something vast was stirring up inside of me. The magic that these people possessed, it all came from the instrument. Whatever that thing was, it played something that's not only made using microtones, but also something that shouldn't exist in this reality. Yesterday, my conscience felt power strong enough to warp the very fabric of the universe. Everything that transpired, it wasn't drugs, it wasn't an hallucination. Time really did skip some beats when I found myself in the car and then in the mansion. The metal string that holds the nuts and bolts, the empty bars in the song it played, that's the pattern of my memories lapsing. That piece of cold, oxidized metal, it resonates with our world. It draws our universe to the other one, the one where sounds smell like roses and summer lavender. They needed me. Eliza needed me to set them free. Soon enough we arrived. The whole family was awaiting my arrival, standing all dressed up in formal attire. The wind was blowing past the forest that embraced their baroque residence, and through their fine cotton garments, waving their sleeves like flags. And Lyth, she was in a crimson-red dress, exhilarating like blood, and gentle as the southern autumn breeze. I could not take my eyes off her. She was truly so wonderful. I loved her, and I knew she loved me too. She just had to, or else she dies. The father, Nicholas, approached me. He had no fear in his eyes, standing proud and stoic. He shook my hand. He was certainly a man I wished I'd met earlier in my life, or in different circumstances. His calm stare met mine, and I think at that moment he realized I knew. "I am grateful you accepted our invitation to come back to the Maya mansion," he said in his usual deep, commanding, but also strangely respectful voice. The man before me was by no means ordinary. That I could tell yesterday, but now I just knew how much he had gone through in his life. I regret not being able to spend more time with him, or the lost stories he could have told me. "Do you have any questions for me?" my host inquired, his face showing relief. "I can see my friend Albert has answered mostly all." "Father, this thing is the reason we are all in this mess. How can you call him—" "Silence," Nicholas abruptly halted Joseph's whining. "One day, when you truly love someone, you'll understand how much he has done for our family, for your mother. One day," I whispered under my nose, saddened by the hope of a prospect that could never come to be. Mr. Meyer heard me, his iron gaze towards his son quickly melting, slowly sliding down the wrinkles that separate the cheek and nose, until inevitably losing to gravity and succumbing to the fall. This fortress of a man before me, he just realized that the only thing he didn't want to lose was already forfeit. He mourned a life that soon would stop dancing to the music of the world. Then, a terrifying thought ransacked and ravaged his mind, his head violently turning towards his other two children. I could hear the forceful beating that resonated throughout his monstrous body. He knew that I knew, and he had to face the answer in my eyes. "Sir," I struggled to find the strength to speak, as before me was my idol, shattering to pieces, a mountain crumbling in a catastrophic landslide. I was about to break whatever he had left. I didn't want to, but the song was about to come to an end. "Yes," he turned, gasping to regain control. A man of his stature, he must face death with dignity. Tears and regrets, things unbefitting of someone who lived a life as fulfilling as him. "I shall answer your question, but first, let me ask two of my own." He nodded. "Have you met Chopin or Debussy? Men as talented as them, surely they would be most fitting for the task at hand." Nicholas took a deep breath. In that moment, perfectly equidistant between the tragedy of losing his children and the hope of saving them, the man before me found resolve. He put his hand on my shoulder, holding on to me. He let out a faint smile that wasn't much, but it was all he could. As I said, dignity is most important in the direst of times. "Do you know the story of Chopin?" he said in a ghastly, guilt-ridden voice, careful not to let another tear slip through. "You know that his mind was ill. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Debussy." I could not find words to reply. After all, Mr. Meyer had created a lot of suffering and death in his lifetime. Through the deepest of love, he found himself committing unfathomable wrongs. How many dead bodies weighed down on his huge, wide shoulders, I shall never know. Or perhaps one day, when I feel that same force pushing down on me. Regardless, I'd allowed myself but a minute to linger on questions. "Do you ever regret what true love made of you?" I asked, as the next beat in the endless song echoed in the ether. Upon hearing this, Nicholas smiled, this time happily. His face was decorated with the memories he held dear, like a child dreaming of an adventure and of mischief, life and death, good and bad. All those things have long become irrelevant to the man who gave all for love. He was stuck between many polar opposites, but during that breath, he found acceptance and resolve. "Never," he stated, proud and sure of himself. It was in the silence between us that I recognized how much that actually meant. My skin was pierced by a million needles as I imagined the mountain of corpses he had made for love, so it lives on in the seemingly endless encore of the song. A song that had to end centuries ago. Oh, I wish one day I feel the same certainty in my wrongdoings as he did. "So, about what you'd like to ask me?" I started, knowing full well the truth that was set in the song would seep tar on the old man's heart. I hesitated for a moment, as enthralled by the music and its significance as I was, I really did look up to him. Breaking the news felt malicious, akin to committing a crime. I was in possession of forbidden knowledge, after all. "Would you forgive this man one last indulgence?" Nicholas asked, eyes shooting straight for the silky sky above us. I don't know. Asking how many of his kids die tomorrow was a question he abstained from knowing the answer to. I was relieved to be free of the responsibility of telling him what I knew, but also burdened by the Herculean task ahead of me. Lace had to live, no matter the cost. For that, I needed to find the missing notes to the song. I had to fix the music box before midnight on the following day. As I passed Klaus, he didn't move, his mind no longer anchored in reality. He had realized what our cryptic conversation with Nicholas meant. It was too much to bear. In the very least, he'd be losing his brother. In the very worst, his whole family was about to be butchered. The despair he felt as death was coming for all he loved, and there was nothing to run to, well, I couldn't begin to imagine.
Tim, the music box. I asked Albert to put it in the guest room.
Eliza stumbled through her words. Her voice was gentle, kind, and very sad. She overheard our conversation. She must have known what it all meant, but I think she still grasped onto a straw of hope that maybe I, a nobody music major, would be able to do what Chopin had failed to. Her breath caressed the air like the feathers of a white swallow, while her dress floated atop her skin, forever falling down and dancing at the whim of her movements. Her hand reached for her hair, which was held hostage by the mischievous wind. She pulled it back, lifting the veil that had obscured her glance. I swear, I could see the world inside them. Every single good thing that was, is, or will be was there, in the wonderful abyss that her deep brown eyes had led me to. Maybe if Chopin had seen her too, the world would be a better place. I was now in what was the guest room, time skipping through to the next short section of abrupt notes that followed few bars of empty space on the string. To everybody else, my task appeared to be impossible, something that cannot be done in the span of 39 hours. Little did they know, I had far less time to work with than that. The influence of the instrument was getting stronger and stronger. My very soul was animated by the rhythm it played. If a sound was missing from it, then the corresponding minutes, even hours, would just pass me by. I was no more than a leaf fluttering in the autumn wind, moving only when prompted, when the score of fate commanded me to. It was a task for no one man to complete, but I was not alone in this endeavor. The Meyer family had prepared the room well. Covering the fine cashmere bed covers were numerous nuts and bolts of different sizes, makes, and materials. Some were made of copper, iron, and even bronze, materials that were more likely common at the time the instrument was initially made. Others, well, they acquired anything that came to mind. Steel, magnesium carbon alloys, glass. If it was possible to make a nut or bolt out of it, it was there. The center of the room was adorned with a huge table, a placeholder for a multitude of different tools, some of them used in tuning musical instruments, while others were just general metalworking files, saws, and anything else that exists under the sun. What was most important than all, the music box itself stood next to the large window overlooking the garden. Perched up on a pedestal, it shone with the blinding light of the Zephyr sun. Such a thing of beauty it was. Tragically, however, my host's ideas were totally useless. The instrument, whatever it plays, has nothing to do with what it's attached to. Given enough time, one can try all the possible combinations of small metal parts, but it would be to no avail. I wouldn't be surprised if the Mayas actually tried to brute force this mechanism, much like a novice thief tries to break a lock instead of picking it. After all, Albert would be perfect for such a task. While the siblings would have probably ridiculed the very thought of asking the man responsible for their unfortunate situation to try and solve it, Nicholas certainly knew the butler could be trusted. The monster's soul was gentle, for it had suffered most of all. To that end, I'm not sure why they even bothered arranging all these things. Maybe Albert just couldn't tell them what was truly needed. As you don't use a hammer to fix the software inside a computer, You cannot just put some metal on this otherworldly piece of art and expect it to work. What it needed was something that can attune to it, something that could deeply understand what the melody really was. To restore the instrument to its original form, one needs to let go of the shackles of our world and transcend. To become one with the place of infinite sounds and boundless timelines, one must let go of the thing he holds most dear, his soul. Ascension is achieved only through sacrifice. Hey, you're actually doing it. Eliza, now standing next to me, cheered like a child who just witnessed the New Year's fireworks for the first time. An incredibly bright, alluring and captivating smile drew my mind to her soft rosy cheeks, up into the supernova that her eyes had become, high on dopamine. This tune, it sounds just like the rest somehow. I had no recollection of what I'd done in the past few hours, but I knew where I was. I was there, talking to the music of life. My soul slowly started to resonate to all the truth encrypted in every peculiarity of its timbre. The endless mosaic of sound was starting to paint a picture in my mind. A masterpiece beyond beauty, unbound by physics, coexisting in all realities all at the same time. I was a slave to it, my work now becoming a very heavy addiction. I did not fear losing my mind, as I knew my sense of self was already shattered into a million radiant pieces, reassembling themselves onto the music box. I was giving a part of myself in exchange for every single beat that was appearing on the instrument. The song had to be completed. After all, at the center of it was Eliza. It was her song. Her flesh and bone was transcribed onto the music score. Her blood was the ink that painted every and each sign. I could not dishonor her sacrifice. In but a few hours, she would bleed. She would bleed and cry sour tears, all in the name of this grand undertaking. Losing my mind and soul was nothing to sob about, nothing at all compared to the beautiful tears her eyes would shed. She will laugh, she will cry, and they will all die. They must. Did Father or Albert tell you how this all began? She cutely mumbled, her curiosity overpowering her indecisive resolve to let me work in silence. Oh, Lice, you shouldn't have worried. You were always the most important part of my work. I knew. I saw and I felt the bittersweet ballad written in the song. A young German man, heir to one of the nation's biggest companies in the 18th century, fell in deep, ludicrous love. She was but a peasant girl, no deed to her name, less the paper signifying her first breath taken in this world. His father would not let this be, to marry, of all things, a dirty provincial broad. The young man, in his rage and absurd infatuation, killed his father, staged the ensemble of evidence to resemble an accident, and took over the company. His mother soon became suspicious, and thus she had to go as well. After all, the sacrificial pyre of love must burn just as bright as a neutron star to push away the creeping vacuum of empty space and encroaching ill-doers. The girl and the man were finally free to marry each other. Oh, it was a ceremony to behold, the dark Gothic church in perfect contrast to their pure, unfaltering feelings. The spring winds were still cold, winter more resilient than usual. The girl would fall sick soon after a tiny spark of life seeped into her womb through the ether. The man, he tried all the doctors, all the seers, anyone and everyone who promised any semblance of hope for curing her condition. To no avail. On her dying bed, the girl would sing songs to the child she would have never brought to our world. She would sing and she would cry, until one day the ether heard her soft, melodic mew. From the coal black abyss of the void, the white visage of a crippled man appeared. As the girl's moan was hushed to a halt, the white man proposed a deal. Every 10 years, he would ask a life. For each and every life, the song has kept dancing on the string of fate. The man held his wife's hand and agreed to the terms proposed, sealing the contract with his own blood. From that day onward, the Maya family was blessed with bodies that do not age and do not suffer ailment. The wife recovered in mere minutes from her deadly sickness and rushed to her husband's large embrace. Nicholas, such a fool you were back then, for love is the curse of men, and to the day you died, a fool you continued to be. Where once black tuberculosis sapped away her life, now vigorous breath festered, preparing the life she held in herself for the world. Soon enough, a healthy baby girl was born, unaware of the blessing she received while still inside her mother and the curse that would one day come with it. In blissful ignorance, the family spent their days, unafraid of sickness or ache. It was in what felt like a blink of an eye when 10 years passed them by. The white man appeared before them, holding an envelope and bearing a message, an ominous note, a deathly reminder of the sin committed. The young man held in his trembling hand, worried that, once more, his wife's life would be forfeit. To his surprising delight, the note was far less malicious than the young man had feared. It demanded the life of a living being be offered, as per the terms of the contract. Elseways, the gift given would be taken. The young man scrambled, excited and filled with hope, to find a bug to offer. That day 3 cockroaches paid the price for the family to live, but the celebration was brief. As soon as the obligation was completed, the note changed right before their eyes. Now it said something different, more sinister, yet still hopeful. Find the instrument that plays the song of the abyss. It started introducing in letters the family to the one thing that could save their lives, forever. There was no detail or clue whatsoever, but the young man would put his mind and wealth into a search that would conclude on one summer afternoon many years later. Else, his family would die. As the note continued, a dark, heart-wrenching secret was revealed. Each and every time a note is given, the wording would be clearer, closer to the true victim needed to fulfill the contract. And certainly, a decade passed, and this time, the prize was to be something that had 4 limbs. Another one. This time it had to be a mammal, the life that had to perish. Certainly, in both cases, mice would suffice, but the young man was getting worried. It was 50 years later when he found the first clue as to where and what the instrument he sought was. A blind card reader down on the Dalmatian coast held the answer he wanted, and soon enough the music box was recovered. The family revered its strange beauty, and the wife, she started playing it all the time. Her daughter and she, they'd stay by the grand fireplace decorating their home and listen to the tune. It was incomplete, but one day, they hoped, they'd find a way to make it whole. The years went by, however, and the bloody fee became direr and direr. The dreaded day soon came, when the note specified it must be a human that is sacrificed in their stead. The wife cried icy tears, but her man's heart was still burning with blistering passion for her. He would not let a human life, such a trivial formality, stand in between their love. He just couldn't. He loved her so, so much. In fact, he loved her just too much. As a handful of peasants from the nearby village were lured in with the promise of a well-paid job and quarters in the city, the young man embraced his wife. She resisted, but he didn't let her go. She cried, but he never stopped. His love was too great, but at that moment it was also blind, egotistic. At that moment he loved only himself. And that moment he would regret to the moment his heart would stop. Ravaged, empty, betrayed by her one true love, the woman cried without rest, cursed to suffer seemingly forever in her undying body. Her man was one of pride, but he was never one to hurt her. But the deed was done. The peasants were killed, and the wife was now bearing 2 more lives for the slaughter. Her daughter. She never knew. Nobody told her, up until this very moment. A grave sin had her father committed, one that would still weigh on his shoulders as he finds his death tomorrow. Transfixed and in a state of utter exaltation with the story and the song, I detached myself from my mortal body. I couldn't see and I couldn't hear, but the sound of gentle tears falling onto my deaf ears woke me from this engrossing phantasm. I made Eliza cry, and upon realizing, my heart broke, cell by cell, into uncountable little pieces. Of course, the story was far too sad for her to bear. I assume many of the things in it she didn't know. Ready to be reprimanded, punished, and reproved, instead I felt the one feeling in my life that I will never forget. The slim, soft hands, their warm scent, her face tucked just under my chin. The moment Liz embraced me for the very first time, I was reborn. Happy beyond belief, I struggled, hesitated to hug her back since I myself was not sure who or what I was anymore. The song was much too strong for a mere mortal like me to resist. It was far too deep into its melody. But Eliza's hug made everything clear. My mind once more reset, and I became a new, better version of myself. In the quiet, oscillating whimpers of the one whom I admired, I heard music. It was a sad, excruciatingly sad tune to listen to, but it was beautiful. I held her hand. I was shaking, so was she. She was standing on the verge between the present and her memories, everything breaking and rearranging right before her eyes. She was confused, but I was in love. Each and every tear that fell was a tick of the grand metronome of fate. Each and every silent sob was a note missing from the instrument. I never imagined it. Eliza's sadness was the key to breaking the riddle. Excited, I told her that in her tears there was a melody, an unfortunate but soul-reaching musical score that was hiding in the breaking of her voice. The excitement was incredible. Without a thought, I rushed towards the table the music box was situated on, and I started tinkering. Eliza's tears soon dried up, as I started putting bolts and bits to the machine with lightning speed and clockwork precision. Yes, this thing, it's not ugly death or empty nothingness it sings about. It's a song about the most wonderful sadness of all. The magical tune is nothing but the dying cries of a woman who was betrayed. This was a truly magnificent work, perhaps by some otherworldly mage or witch, but it captured the essence of tragedy so well enough to replace reality with a story, to exchange one life for another. This was the work of a genius, and also the work of someone who had lost everything. I cranked the instrument and it started playing. The tune was melancholic, yet, in a way, uplifting. It brought hope in the eyes of the one I loved. As Eliza listened to my work, she smiled, and then she laughed, and then she cried. All her life, there was a cold, unfeeling grasp strangulating her very soul. Now it was all lifted. For the first time in centuries, she was able to look forward to that one day every 10 years that was always stained in blood. In me, she saw her savior, her hero, the one who just saved her family from certain doom. She was ready for the final note we needed to complete the piece, the note that would let her live as her family around her dies. It was for her, I tell myself, that I rushed into her open arms. With one fell swoop, I cleared all the metal, glass, and plastic, revealing the satin-dressed bed. There, I put down my love, our bodies entwined in perfect unison, playing a song that even death shall remember. For it was this piece that would cheat fate for one last time. Oh, if I said I only did it for the song, or for putting yet another cog into the workings of destiny, I'd be lying. Eliza's body, every single inch of it, was embellished with skin softer than any silk man can make. Her lips were soft and savory, her breath synchronized with mine, warm and carrying the aroma of summer flowers. We were both slaves to the rhythm of the song, playing our parts in its grand design. For many hours, we committed to ourselves, to each other. Without words, only through sounds we existed. And when our short-lived ode was finally done, well, that was when I had the means to save her life. Little did she know, I could never really finish the song of fate on my own. What I put on the music box was an attempt, but it was bound to fail. Regardless, at least her heartbeat will persist. Even if she hates me, what would true love be if it cannot overcome it? So, she broke the silence, you never said how Albert was able to get the way he is now, being able to do some things that we humans can't. He was just a cripple when I was growing up. Well, I caressed her, preparing her a tiny bit for what was coming. When your mother pled to your father that her time is over, that she doesn't want to live sacrificing others anymore, your father would not agree. So she tried and tried, but nothing could break Nicholas's resolve. That's when your mother wrote a song, or at least a part of it. The workings of the instrument are strange. It must have slipped your mind, but do you remember that before your mother's death, the music box, was slightly less completed? Eliza gasped. It was always in front of her, always in her thoughts, but she never managed to break the cruel magic imposed by the device. The last bar that the instrument played, those were her mother's dying words, the will she left behind for her kids. Mere seconds of music, but just enough to save her daughter's life one last time. Of course, Eliza didn't know as much, and I do not wish to tell her. In retrospect, I really should have. In her unending tears, I suffer my own demise 1,000,000 times each day. Albert, then, she sniffed, sobbed, and let out a lonely tear. He awoke in a way when my mum added to the instrument. Yes, I answered. You see, Albert is a creature of immense power, but almost all of it is bound by the song. I do not know why that is. Perhaps an exorcist or something of that kind. Someone sealed him through the instrument. Your mother released a part of him when she added that last bar. He became able to communicate with you. He started doing things impossible for the rest of us, like, for example, change our perception of reality, even our very own desires. All so a tormented woman could finally ask for her own death. In her last act of rebellion, she requested of a demon to make her husband set her free. Awful ringing echoed in my ears. The wheel of fate started moving with incredible speed. My mind felt agonizing pain as the minutes and hours started melting together, flowing away like a river. I could see and hear what was going on as time was lapsing. I spent that night with Eliza, and then we woke up happy, embracing each other in bed. I was looking at us, at myself and her, through a thick pane of glass, impossible to breach. I felt hurt. I felt robbed, as the song took away from me the sweetest moments of my life. I waited and waited to regain control of myself, but alas, I couldn't. It seemed my work was done, and as I became a mere servant of the song, it skipped ahead to where I was needed next. The dreaded evening was nigh. I was sitting with all the members of the Maya family in the dining room. We were drinking wine together. A vinyl with classical music was playing on the gramophone. Everybody was dressed up with formal suits, myself included. Adorning the table was the music box, now fully equipped. Liz was standing next to it, cranking it with grace, and from under her hands a beautiful tune was coming out. It was the tune she had inspired. I was just a tool in her hands, her tears driving my limbs to move and work. But they didn't know that. Neither did she. And so they were congratulating me, thanking me, issuing toasts in my name. And during all that, Albert was there, looking at me. He was fully aware of what I'd done, but he seemed happy. His hands would not spill quite as much blood as he had feared, for he was a gentleman, despite whatever sin he'd once committed. Albert had a kind heart, and for all I know, the instrument was a means to torture it forever. I wonder how many millennia he had to endure, imprisoned by this most cruel of devices. Will I endure as much? Silently, I waited for time to pass. The Mayas were cheerful, but I didn't see any reason for them to be. They were going to die. My tired, broken mind lost its grasp of time yet again, and when I came to it, it was already almost midnight. Albert walked up to the table, accepting the hatred in everyone's stare. After all, just 10 years ago, he'd butchered their beloved mother and wife in front of their very eyes. That's a sight you can never forgive. As he reached the gold-lined table, he extended his right hand, holding the dreaded note. The family knew full well what it contained, but they were terrified nonetheless. This time around, the letter contained no words. Instead, all it had were 4 drops of blood, magically staying on the paper without seeping into it. The ritual required something with their own blood to perish tonight. They nodded, accepting that they understand what the price to pay was. Then Albert pointed at the music box. This signified that if the Song of Fate was finally completed, the slaughter will not come to pass. Nicholas stood up, buttoned his blazer, and gestured for Eliza to go to the instrument and play it. And so she did. Her beautiful white hands gently cranked the device, and from the synergy of metal and flesh, a masterpiece was born. Each and every bar, each and every note, they were delightful and sad beyond belief. We all started crying, listening to this divine ensemble of sound and feelings. Even Albert, yes, even the cursed man himself, shed a tear at the very end. It seemed the song had set him free. Tim, Albert turned to me, a smile, a genuinely happy smile decorating his flaky face. For breaking the seal, I must thank you. The family cheered, jumping off of their chairs and embracing each other. In their eyes, I could see the exultation of success. The least I can do for you, Tim, he continued, is to give you the means to save the one you love, perhaps. I didn't understand what he meant. This much wasn't written in the song. Did I actually manage to appease the curse? Did I save everyone, despite what destiny itself had shown me? My confusion was brief, as the very next thing Albert did was drive his hand inside Nicholas's chest, grasping his heart and pulling it out while a sea of dark, crimson blood gushed out. The pain in his eyes was short-lived. He quickly succumbed to the void. One last glance he gave towards all his children, and like a giant, he collapsed on the floor, shaking us all to the bone. His heart, it was still beating in the white man's hands. The sight was disgusting, and the sound, I could hear the deep, muffled pumping coming out of the valves, illustrated by the fine splatters of blood with every pulse. It was then the butler rushed me, catching me completely off guard. In one swift motion, he pressed Nicholas's heart onto my chest and uttered a spell in a language I'd never heard. It was all over within seconds, throughout which I was absolutely paralyzed. At first, I thought he killed me too, although the Myers had assured me multiple times that whatever happens, I would not be hurt. And indeed, after the seconds of brain-numbing adrenaline passed, I looked down and my body seemed intact. When I looked up, I saw Joseph swinging a rapier towards Albert, trying to kill him before he gets butchered himself. The young man had taken one of the swords out of the display on the opposite wall and was just about to drive it right through the cursed man's chest. Time froze for me yet again, but this was different. My eyes had finally opened. I could see how the magic works. There was a fine layer of ice, appearing out of the nothingness and spreading on top of the butler's body. I saw the rapier shatter as it hit the crystal shield, which seemed as tough as diamond. I looked at Joseph's morbidly confused expression as some of the metal shards flew back at him, cutting his own flesh and letting out blood. He was surprised, so terribly surprised that for the first time in his life he felt the pain of bleeding. Before his very eyes, his own blood was raining down from his newly opened wounds, a sight he had never seen before. After all, that same frozen barrier which protected Albert also used to protect the family from harm. Without it, they would all be easy prey for the demon. Joseph crumbled on the ground, shaking and murmuring incomprehensible sounds. His end was coming. That much was certain. This was my final act of kindness in this world, Tim. For I have killed the man you admire, so you don't have to. He lied. My blood froze in the middle of a heartbeat. His words, I realized what his spell was supposed to do. I started shaking with vigor. Something insane was stirring up inside me. I screamed, my senses heightened by the blood that Joseph had spilled. His blood. I could feel my teeth growing, tingling with the thrill of the hunt. My fingers started swelling up, elongating into a horrifying amalgamation of bone, claw, and muscle. My skin darkened, hardened. I was changing. I was transforming into something else, something far too different from the human I used to be. I leapt, with a smile on my face. I severed Joseph's head clean off his spine. I watched with inexplicable delight as his unbelieving eyes followed their body as it was getting further and further away. A trail of blood and marrow followed the trajectory of its gruesome flight. Another sight I enjoyed against my spellbound will. More blood was needed to appease the song. 2 more had to die tonight. I charged with my newfound strength towards Klaus, who was opposite of where I'd butchered his brother. Maybe his gigantic stature would prove a better sport. I flew, my saliva dripping from my jaw. I was a beast. I had become something cruel and vile, something with unquenchable desire for death and violence. As I reached him, I expected resistance. Maybe he'd try to punch me, throw me back, do something to postpone his inevitable end. Instead, he just stood. He had accepted what was to come. Boring, I shouted, my humanity truly dying from within me, as I drove my claws into his chest, feeling for his failing heart. As I was about to rip it out, something about him, something in his eyes, restored a speck of reason in my brain. Try to save her, please, were his last words, before he himself dropped like a rock on the cold marble floor. Save? I cannot save anyone. You all did this to yourselves, I screamed, invigorated by the carnage I'd made. The air was thick with the smell of slashed flesh and gushing blood. The pact would not be complete if the final victim didn't die. My soul sinking deeper into darkness, I soon found myself going for Eliza, the one whom I truly loved. could not damage her pretty face. I didn't want her blood to spill disgracefully. Her guts would not drag like rags on the floor. No. I'd planned for her a swifter, more dignified death. I would drive a single nail into the very center of her heart. It would stop, and she would freeze. Forever beautiful, forever mine. With measured motion, against my will, my claws reached for her, while she stood confused. Oh, my dear, I wish you never know how much I wanted you to die right there. I hit flesh. Blood gushed out, but it wasn't hers. The liquid that I spilled was black, dense, thicker than tar, and it smelled like swamp. It was old and rotten, and it was the man who had suffered most of all. Albert stood between me and my love, his smiling face hiding the pain of his now severed arm. He had saved Eliza, but to what avail? She had to die regardless. No, he whispered, crumbling to the ground himself, the wound too big for him to stand upright. Then it struck me. Me and him. We'd worked together to find a way for Lies to live. When we were in my house, when he was tapping to the song, in the silence between each beat, he'd explained to me the only way he could see, the only way she lives through tonight. The memories, the song, it all came back to me. Tears filled my eyes, for I'd succumbed to the evil without as much as a grain of doubt. Before me stood the woman I loved, and I'd almost killed her, even though there was a way for her to live. I looked her in the eye. I remembered the time we'd spent. Our beautiful unison would be my curse, but it would also signify her salvation. Eliza, I'm sorry, I said, as with deep regret I hit her stomach, where her womb was. She dropped down, holding herself tight with both her arms. She was hugging herself and the spark of life we had made. The tiny flame I'd just extinguished. In agonizing pain, my body started reverting to the form it had before. The claws receded, the teeth grew back inside the bone of my jaw, and the superhuman strength I'd felt before was nothing but a nightmare. All the hellish burning that I felt in my limbs and through my tortured nerves was nothing in comparison to the shame that was left. Albert had never wanted to hurt anybody. He truly didn't. It was the song. The song was controlling him, me, like puppets propped on strings. The two of us were like brothers now, bound by something much stronger than blood, bound by duty. What he was, I have now become. It's been 3 days since that awful night, but Eliza still trembles when she sees me. I am the monster who killed all she held dear. I am the one who tricked her into living when all that awaits is pain. I made a deal with the devil, not the kind one-armed man who stands faithfully beside me, but the true, unnameable evil of this world. I made a deal with all the hatred, all the spite that now permeates my every cell. It's the immortal atrocity that does not come through portals in the ground, but instead makes me move with each and every beat. An abomination veiled in the sound of eternal sadness, coded in a rusty, hand-cranked puzzle in the basement of the mansion. A puzzle I need to solve in the coming decade, lest I kill my one true love with my own 2 hands. Albert does all he can, but as good-natured as he is, he's not enough to finish the song. I need someone that can complete this inhuman task and set us all free. To think, once I wished for endless life, such a fool I was. For this immortality is truly hell on earth. I cannot spend a day, a minute, not even a single second passes without the creeping fear, the smell of blood nauseating my every sense. I I can feel it. It's coming for me, and when it does, I will have to kill her. There are no notes left. She is the one true sacrifice, and unless anyone out there deciphers the riddle, her blood will forever stain my hands. And worst of all, I will have to live. The icy shield protects me, for I am a tool, a simple cog in the machine, without a will, but still in possession of a soul. Help me save myself by saving her.
So, my dear friends, yes, it happened again. Somebody claimed copyright on my background music. God damn it. Well, it's not happening too often at the moment, so hopefully this will be the last one. Anyway, yeah, I thought this was a good opportunity to polish that one up and re-release it. And, well, yeah, because I'm working on a couple of 2-hour stories. Well, quite a few, actually. So, yeah, there's going to be something big coming at the weekend. And lots more next week as well. So hopefully you're going to enjoy the new stuff. Anyway, that was one that I really enjoyed from back in the day, and I just refused to let it go. So yes, that's my reason for doing that one again. And well, yeah, okay, it's Friday, isn't it? Okay, have a lovely weekend, everybody. Summer in the Northern Hemisphere is coming to an end, so get out there and enjoy it if you're up here in the north with us. Until the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams and bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.